Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mavardi. We are coming to you live on Monday afternoon. Today is August 26th. And literally 5 minutes before we were slated to get this thing started, we got the breaking news that the Dallas Cowboys and star wide receiver CeeDee Lamb have agreed to a new 4-year, $136 million contract extension. So we are going to be diving into the latest on that, how it impacts the upcoming season for the Dallas Cowboys, and additionally, what this means for the other wide receiver negotiation processes that are currently ongoing with the Brandon Ayuk and Jamar Chase situations. So we'll be talking about that. We will then be diving into the world of college football as week 0 kicked off this week, and we got a banger of a game off the start with Florida State being upset by Georgia Tech. So already, first game in the books, a top 10 team down. So we will talk about that, as well as SMU's comeback win in their first ever game as a member of the ACC. And then we will circle back to the NFL, where we will be diving into some of the preseason takeaways, some of the key injury updates, and other headlines from the NFL over the course of the weekend, before we wrap up the show by kicking off our preview for every NFC West team. Today we are going to be starting out with the Arizona Cardinals, so you're going to want to stick around for that. But before we get into everything, obviously very action-packed show. If you would consider leaving a tip or donation, you can use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net. Your input is very impactful to us, so whether it's that, using the super chat button, or just dropping a quick comment in the comment section, anything would be greatly appreciated as we try and make this show as interactive as possible. So again, definitely be sure to give us your thoughts on the breaking news here and any other sports questions that you may have. We are now going to be giving some initial reactions here to the deal that the Dallas Cowboys have just agreed to with wide receiver CeeDee Lamb, which is going to make him the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history, as he signs a 4-year extension worth $136 million per Ian Rappaport. This deal just came out no more than 10 minutes ago. CeeDee Lamb gets $100 million guaranteed and a wide receiver record $38 million signing bonus in getting this deal done. Again, all details there credited to Ian Rappaport, who just broke this story. So this obviously is a massive deal for a number of different reasons. We will start by analyzing this from the perspective of the Dallas Cowboys. They have been in the sort of bad graces, I would phrase it as, with the national media basically the entire offseason, considering the fact that they really didn't go out and spend all that much money. They saw a number of key players from the key players and within the coaching staff walk away during free agency, and people were sort of looking at the Cowboys like, okay, you've been very successful over the course of these past few years, but you're not doing anything. You're losing all of these pieces, and on top of all of that, there are 3 cornerstone players in quarterback Dak Prescott, wide receiver CeeDee Lamb, and edge rusher linebacker Micah Parsons were all eligible for a contract extension, and for the longest time the Cowboys were unable to get any of those deals done, which struck a lot of red flags for a lot of people. But now they at least check one of those off the list by getting CeeDee Lamb under contract, which is at least a step in the right direction. Now, if you've been listening to our show here, I have made the arguments in the past that CeeDee Lamb is a very, very talented wide receiver, and truthfully, I mean, locking him up is at least a start, because even if he isn't here long term and he doesn't make it through the entire contract, CeeDee Lamb, yes, now a very, very expensive contract, but not a player where I see the value there diminishing within a couple years to the point where the Cowboys can't get anything out of it. So you just sort of save yourself the drama by getting this deal with CeeDee Lamb done. But that being said, out of those big three that I just referenced, him, Dak Prescott, and Micah Parsons, you are coughing up a lot of money to probably, at least in my opinion, the least impactful player out of that group. Now, I know people have their issues with Dak Prescott, and I fully understand the concerns there. The fact that we don't have a very extensive playoff record, that we've seen regular season games go their way, but ultimately nobody cares about that, especially when you play for the Dallas Cowboys. So I understand Dak 100% needs to be better in the playoffs, but he was second in MVP voting last year. Now, a weaker MVP voting class, I suppose, sure. But Dak, in my opinion, is a top 10 wide receiver and is sort of the identity of this offense right now. Even before CeeDee fully emerged, I mean, Dak was holding it down as much as he possibly could throughout his tenure here in Dallas. Now, obviously, a different identity of that offense now in comparison to what it looked like when Dak Prescott was first drafted in 2016, I believe it was. Back then, it was Ezekiel Elliott in the backfield with one of the best offensive lines maybe in the entire 2010s. On that Dallas Cowboys front line where they were able to ground and pound. You had some very notable wide receivers as well, but it was more so about the run game with Dallas and sort of easing Dak into it in comparison to last year where it was basically all through the air game, didn't really have much of a running back room. Tony Pollard did not live up to who they were expecting to be as a lead back, and it was really on the shoulders of Dak, now granted with CeeDee as well, and that's why they were one of the best passing offenses in the league. So again, when you're looking at CeeDee Lamb, he deserves a lot of credit for it as well, but that being said, Dak is the one who is now dealing with a pretty poor offensive line overall here. Now, we'll see. Maybe some of these young players can develop for them. Tyler Guyton, I'm a little bit iffy on, at least in terms of his year one production. You're relying on a lot of youth. And, you know, you're set at those two guard positions, but outside of that, it's a lot of unknowns on the offensive line. So it's going to be necessary to capitalize on the pass game. And now CeeDee is going to probably have a little bit of higher expectations. And he's had high expectations since he was drafted in the first round. He's going on 3 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons. He's only continued to get better year after year. So I think he's going to be able to hold his own to that. But, you know, outside of the Cowboys as well, again, this is kind of a deal they had to get done. I'm still very curious as to what they do with the Dak Prescott contract situation now, more so than the Micah Parsons situation. Parsons, I think, still has 2 fully guaranteed years left on his deal, so he had even publicly said that he wanted them to prioritize getting CeeDee and Dak done before understanding just sort of the natural pecking order there based off of urgency. But now, definitely going to be a question as to what sort of shakes out in Dallas in terms of making additional moves. This obviously also coming on the heels as well of Jerry Jones saying that it's not exactly a priority, which seemed to ruffle some feathers a little bit, but ultimately they get the deal done regardless and make him, again, the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history. Now, that being said, that does have additional ramifications across the league. Because CeeDee Lamb, I mean, coming off of an All-Pro first-team season, he was All-Pro second-team in 2022. So, already very much established as one of the top wide receivers in the NFL. I don't think that anybody would really dispute that. But this has been a very noisy offseason in terms of sort of the situations with how teams are going about these contracts for wide receivers. The Brandon Ayuk dispute has been very much an ongoing conversation through the entirety of the offseason, and he is going to be trying to get a new contract. And Jamar Chase, who did just return to practicing, I believe, within these past couple days, which is a big positive for Bengals fans, but that's somebody who has made an all-pro second team before, who I think can very easily, as long as he and Joe Burrow are both fully healthy, he can be in that first or second team conversation as his years continue to progress. Injuries to himself in 2022 and injuries to Burrow in 2023 sort of threw off that cohesiveness of the offense. I mean, the numbers, Jamar still hasn't had less than 1,000 yards in a season, hasn't had less than 7 touchdowns in a season. So, I mean, he is very much in that conversation, and the Bengals know that they're going to have to pay him at this point. Like, there's no getting around it, especially when Jamar Chase is going to see what CeeDee Lamb just got. It's almost certain that as long as he is able to have another healthy season, he's going to get paid big time as well, which does sort of lead further for the Bengals. Not that we want to get too far on that tangent right now, but they're already paying Joe Burrow. They're going to have to pay Jamar Chase, probably top, at least match this Dak Prescott, or this CeeDee Lamb, I should say, contract, but probably up it as well if they don't get it done until, next season. And that's so much money to have tied up into 2 players. They already have their other wide receiver, and T. Higgins has made some ruffles a little bit over the course of the offseason when he and the Bengals couldn't agree to a long-term deal after the franchise tag. So I think it almost certainly puts to rest the idea that T. Higgins is going to be with this Bengals team any longer than just this upcoming season. But it's definitely going to have its share of shockwaves moving forward here. And you think about, a very good portion of these young wide receivers already just got paid, whether you're talking about A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith on that same roster, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson. This has been a very high spending offseason in terms of the top wide receivers in the league and some of these younger names. But that's when you start to think about, well, what is a Jalen Waddle potentially going to get? And you sort of look to that next slate of wide receivers. Again, Jamar Chase, still unfinished business there. Brandon Ayuk, unfinished business there. But we're going to start to see, in this next year or so, who could be the next wide receiver to top that. I think Ayuk and Chase are probably the top of the conversation there, but it is only going to continue to go up, of course, in years to come. And the 2022 class becomes very interesting, at least to me, considering the fact that, we've been talking about the Falcons, Drake London, their first-round pick of 2022. He's going to be up soon. Definitely not looking at that type of money, but he's going to have expectations for himself to get paid. Falcons have a lot of evaluation there. Garrett Wilson was also part of that 2022 class. He's been nothing but reliable and exceptional for a Jets offense that has been massively underwhelming over the course of the past couple seasons. So I think that he could probably, I know it's a lot, obviously, to ask, becoming the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL. That, yes, Garrett Wilson has nice numbers. You'd probably like to see a little bit more there in terms of, reaching the top of the top. But I'm just saying, this is where we start to have the conversations, because it is exponential how much, especially at this point with the importance of the passing game, that how much these wide receivers are getting paid, and sort of how teams are going to be able to balance that, evaluate that conversation becomes very interesting. And it was CeeDee Lamb who sort of comes in here and resets the market. So again, just initial reactions here. This news broke about 20 minutes or so ago now at this point. So Still have a lot of things to work out here, but let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section, because this is definitely league breaking here. But we are now going to actually be switching gears to college football before we come back around to the NFL. But the original segment 1 plan was to talk about what was in a short but an excellent weekend in college football. Week 0 kicking off. We already see a top 10 team in the country go down. We saw multiple extensive comebacks in this weekend. So we're going to be diving into all of that, talking about what the chances are that Florida State, who obviously is the team that did go down out of the top 10, and what that means for their playoff hopes. A whole lot to dive into there. But first, a quick break. Do not go anywhere as we are coming to you with this action-packed episode. But first, a quick break. We'll be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, no, this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news if it's some losing shit. A stupid myth, you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be diving into this week's Week 0 college football action. Very limited slate this past weekend, and yet we still got a handful of very fun, surprising moments that we're going to have a lot to look forward to this college football season. But obviously the headliner out of this was the first game of the slate, with the Florida State Seminoles facing the Georgia Tech Golden Jackets, and we saw our first upset of the season, a number 10 Florida State team falling on a walk-off field goal from Georgia Tech to lose 24-21. And it was just an incredible way, really, for college football fans to kick off this season, seeing sort of some of the mayhem, at least, that is going to occur. That being said, though, not an incredible way to start the season for Florida State. And it was coming into this year an off-season full of drama, of the Seminoles missing the playoffs after an undefeated season. They are getting into legal disputes with the ACC about what the future of them and the conference looks like. That this year was supposed to be sort of the revenge tour, them coming back to show the world that they were wrong to leave them out of the playoffs last year and that they're still one of the best teams. It's not exactly fair to frame it that way, because obviously tons of turnover from last season to this year. But that being said, there should have been no short of motivation for Florida State to come out and set the tone early on in the season. And instead, they drop one to maybe a Georgia Tech team that could be more competitive than people were anticipating. But that being said, a bad loss for Florida State. In this game taking place in Ireland, I understand weird circumstances. You're traveling, you're taking a bunch of college kids who are getting this incredible experience to go to Ireland. They're playing a team that they should definitely beat in Georgia Tech. The focus wasn't there. I think that's a little bit of an indictment against the coaching staff, but Obviously, in this game, especially on social media, all of the attention was sort of turned to DJ Uiagalelei, the Florida State quarterback transferring in from Oregon State, and he was pretty mediocre in this game. And if you are, a lot of people were still having these high expectations for DJU, which comes from the fact that he once was a 5-star, and the first time we really got to see him was during that COVID season, him coming in against Notre Dame, throwing for, I think it was 5 touchdowns. But it's been pretty clear since then that Uiagalelei isn't that level. He can be a solid college football quarterback, which I think that he still is, and that's where I think people get lost, because DJ did not lose this game for Florida State. Obviously, if you were holding him to that former 5-star standard, you came away disappointed, and this was a little bit of a rude awakening for you. But I don't think he was bad in this game. 19 of 27, 193 yards. Ultimately, he kind of did what they asked him to do. They didn't ask him necessarily to do all that much, where it was a lot of short stuff. His accuracy wasn't elite by any means, but he was hitting wide receivers, whether they were perfect throws or not. They were able to move the chains at least somewhat through the air. But I think that ultimately, he definitely left a lot of things to be desired, especially on the deep passes. That's where, when you talk about the progression of DJU over these past few seasons, you're going to be disappointed, because that arm talent hasn't evolved in the way we were anticipating. But again, I do think more times than not, he makes the right plays. He puts balls, at least he puts his receivers in a good position to at least have a play on it. And ultimately, when he walked off the field for the last time, it was a tie game. That last drive of his, I think, was sort of the epitome of what DJ is at this point. He had his share of mistakes, misreading a play, throwing to the wrong guy, but being able to bounce back and convert on a 3rd and long. He just sort of missed the mark, but he just kept responding to all of these mistakes. There were multiple 4th and longs on that drive that DJ and Florida State were able to pick up. But, and drive all the way down the field and score a touchdown to tie the game with 6 minutes and 33 seconds left. Usually in that situation, you feel like you're going to get another chance to either come back and have to put another drive together with your back against the wall, or that you have a chance to just straight up win it. And instead, DJ got neither, because that Georgia Tech team just kept running down the throats of Florida State. It was not a perfect drive by any means from Georgia Tech, but they killed clock. And as they were, they end up getting into field goal range, they almost blew it because of a fumbled snap. But, even then, able to make up that yardage, get into field goal range, and then a field goal from Aiden Burr, 44-yarder, sends the Seminoles back to America with a loss. We have a comment here from a Miami Hurricanes fan. He said, as a Hurricanes fan, I laughed when I heard Florida State, Luck, and Georgia Tech lose, and Georgia Tech, because last year they were trolling us after we lost to the same team in the same way. Well, Miami definitely last year suffered their share of brutal losses. A little bit of a state rivalry there as well between Florida State and Miami. So 100% I understand from you, Anthony, that you are allowed to sort of laugh in the face of Florida State a little bit in this one, especially with, arrogance can be a good thing for a football team, but Florida State was pretty arrogant about the way they went across the end of the season last year as well. Sort of the, I don't know if you want to call it entitlement, But, having that undefeated record, everybody that watched football understood the idea that they were not a top 4 team. And, I don't even want to go into that whole debate right now because we're moving on to a new year this year. But definitely very disappointing for Florida State after all of that drama that took place at the end of last season to come out flat in this way. Very disappointing there. But, again, sort of wrapping up the thoughts here on DJ. I thought he played fine. He's not the reason why they lost this game. He's nowhere near the player that people were hoping him to be when, especially at Clemson, during that point, Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence, DJU was supposed to be the next guy, and instead just sort of flamed out there, and he's been sort of, I wouldn't even say struggling to pick up the pieces since then. He had a good season at Oregon State last year. He's capable of still having another good year this season at Florida State, but a brutal loss. But like I mentioned, I don't put this game on him. I think that this came down to the line of scrimmage and Florida State losing in the trenches, because when you look at the fact that, DJ was facing pretty heavy blitzes throughout the entire game, and even more so importantly, you just look at the differences in rush yards. 190 for Georgia Tech, 98 versus Florida State. After that opening drive touchdown from the Seminoles, they really weren't getting much on the run game. Now, I think it's definitely still possible for them to be able to respond because they have a number of talented running backs in that locker room, but they're going to need some help from their offensive line. And defensively, that was their entire identity, really, especially once Jordan Travis went down back in the 2023 season. For them to get pushed around the way that they did was, frankly, a little bit embarrassing for them. And Georgia Tech is a very good rushing offense, but that was a very big concern for me in terms of Florida State. Very quickly here, because I do want to sort of flip the page here and get into some of Georgia Tech, but, as for Florida State's playoff hopes, I don't think that the committee is going to hold a week 0 loss, walk-off loss to Georgia Tech in Ireland fully against them. It's a bad look, 100%. I think it's something that Florida State can respond from, especially with how forgiving this 12-team format is, but they're definitely going to have their work cut out for them. But like I mentioned, want to give Georgia Tech some credit here, and I think that ultimately, Haynes King is a quarterback that led the ACC in passing yards last year. He was very hit or miss, though. Was second in the entire country in interceptions. But he provides some versatility to that run game as well. And I thought that he was very solid in this. Not much of a downfield threat in terms of letting it loose on the deep ball, but was still able to hit all the stuff underneath, 11 of 16, 146 yards, and was very impactful in the run game as well, where he had 54 yards. So I thought that was a really nice upside for Georgia Tech and this Golden Jackets team to be able to, week 0, technically, I was going to say week 1, come out, establish that they are still the team that can move the ball on the ground as well as anybody in the ACC, and depending on how this year goes, maybe even the country as a whole. Anthony, like I said, I did sort of already touch on your comment. As a Miami fan, you should be able to laugh at Florida State a little bit based off of, that interstate division or that interstate rivalry and such. Interconference rivalry has all the makings for it. But, that being said, Miami also with their share of tough losses last year. But I also want to touch here on the SMU-Nevada game. SMU making their debut as a member of the ACC. Just talked about Florida State, talked about Georgia Tech, talked about Haynes King maybe sort of inserting himself and making a name for himself a little bit more on a big stage. And there's another quarterback as well that maybe could have established himself a little bit in the conference, and that was Preston Stone. And it was not a pretty start for him. His first pass was an interception. He was 3 of 10 in the first half as a whole, but down the stretch, I thought that he was really impressive. Him and RJ Maryland. RJ Maryland, crazy game. I believe it was 6 receptions, over 160 receiving yards. Him and Stone definitely seemed to have a connection there. SMU was running with a couple different quarterback looks, but it was Stone down the stretch, letting that deep ball go. Again, primarily to Maryland, but I thought that it was a very impressive job from him. SMU, they were something like 27-point favorites headed into this game against Nevada, and they ended up being way closer than it should have. Took this Preston Stone comeback to be able to put it together. So SMU, again, little bit of a scare there on the road against Nevada, but able to, reel it back in, put together some impactful drives at the end of this game. Got the run game going a little bit as well, which was encouraging to see from them. And, going to be very interesting to monitor going forward how SMU is able to hang in there with the best of the ACC. But again, just week 0 in college football, not too many headliner games. There were a number of other good games as well. The Montana State comeback was also very impressive, but whole lot more action to get into as these weeks come on here. Very much looking forward to it. But we are now going to be taking a quick break, and when we come back on the other side, we're going to be switching gears back to the NFL, where I want to give some thoughts on the performance from Bryce Young, where we finally got to see him play in his first game ahead of the 2024 season. A crucial year. We'll break down what we saw this past weekend and sort of what it could mean and what pressure lies on Bryce Young for this upcoming season. So we will dive into that. But first, a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we had an action-packed weekend full of football, and we are sort of continuing to just iron out all of the different takeaways. Week 3 of the NFL preseason, so we got very few starters sort of pop up across the league, but we did get the first look at Bryce Young for ahead of the 2024 season, which I want to hit on a little bit, because Bryce Young obviously had a very disappointing rookie season. We've talked about this on the show before. Some of it due to his own fault, but in large part, it was because of incompetence that surrounded him. And I've been really anticipating seeing what he looks like once again. And, Dave Canales and the Panthers didn't allow us to get that look for a little bit there, as Young and the starters didn't play in either of the first 2 preseason games, but we at least finally got some brief experience with him this past weekend, as we saw the Panthers roll out their starters to face off against the Bills, and ultimately only one drive out of that starting unit, but it looked pretty good. Now, all of this to be said before we go any further here, obviously it's against backup defenders in Buffalo. So can't be throwing any parades based off of how the starting offense looked in that drive. But, I mean, overall, pretty encouraging to see. Now, again, take that for what it may be. But Bryce Young, 6 of 8, 70 yards, and a touchdown. So, sort of looking a little bit deeper into it, one of the main things that caught my eye in this game with Bryce Young was the fact that when you look at Dave Canales and understanding that he has been sort of made out to be this quarterback guru over the past couple years based off of what he did with Geno Smith in 2022 as the passing game coordinator in Seattle, with Baker Mayfield in 2023 as their offensive coordinator. It's this idea that he can be able to build a system and an offensive play style that better suits these players that do have talent and have experience in different ways and such. But one of the things that stood out to me in this game was the fact that you could see a number of designed play action plays, but not just that, but bootlegs and rollouts where they were trying to move the pocket, get Bryce Young in a little bit of space. I know that he's short, which is something that rightfully so is talked about. I think it can get a little bit overblown at some time, but you do have to consider that he is small, and I think that ultimately, that sort of leads people to forget about how athletic he was when he was at Alabama, that he was able to use his legs and scramble out, and that's what I thought he did a pretty good job of showing, at least in this preseason game. And I think that almost the fact that you can look at that as well as part of a knock on his height, that they weren't totally trying to have him just sit back in the pocket. Now, they did a couple times. Thought the blocking on the offensive line was very good. Again, backups. But when Bryce Young was sitting in the pocket as well, I thought he made some nice plays. So by no means am I trying to tell you that that can't be a part of the Panthers offense this upcoming season. But I thought it was pretty interesting, again, especially after holding off on playing Bryce Young and company over these first couple weeks. What message did Dave Canales want to send during his first game? I think it's that a little bit you're going to see some different looks. We're going to be seeing Bryce Young maybe on the move a little bit this upcoming season. They spent big money in the offseason to bring in offensive guards in Damian Lewis and Robert Hunt to try and beef up that group, but that doesn't mean necessarily the Panthers are just going to be ready to have Bryce Young sit back and take a whole lot of hits in the pocket. Now, again, we'll see even more so what that does look like when we get some legitimate NFL defenses rushing him. That's where I start to draw a little bit more concerns, but ultimately, again, it was a very successful drive. Run game looked fine for them as well. So, preseason, can't preface it enough that this is against backups and we can't put too much stock into it. But the overall process in which Carolina put together, I thought was pretty solid. We have a comment here from Anthony Manzano. He says, I live around a lot of Carolina Panthers fans, and we were talking about this preseason game, and even after his great performance, they still don't have faith in Bryce as their franchise quarterback, and they want to move on and probably try to draft someone in this draft coming up. I'll be honest, I was never quite as sold on Bryce Young as others coming into the draft either, so I can understand that. It's going to be a little difficult, I feel like, for Carolina to fully make that move, especially after it's not like they just sat at the top of the draft and took him. They moved up, traded DJ Moore, and the pick that ended up being Caleb Williams in this 2024 draft in order to get Bryce Young. So I do think there's going to be a little bit of a pride factor from that front office of trying to do everything they can to make this work. Now, again, that's just sort of speculation there. it's not a great way to go about business, is sort of make up for your previous mistakes like that and try and dig yourself out of a hole that you've already dug. So I understand that that's not a super convincing argument, but that being said, I think the Panthers are going to try and sort of turn this thing around. They gave Dave Canales a 6-year contract, which is a little bit unprecedented in terms of head coach deals are usually 3, 4, 5 years. I think that there were 2 actually head coaches who got 6 years this season, and it was Dave Canales and Mike McDonald, both younger coaches, both coming into younger teams. And I think that it's a little bit of a statement from the front office that we are acknowledging that this might take a little bit of time. So I think that the way that this is going to play out, unless Bryce Young really, really struggles this year and looks unplayable, I think he probably has 2 years. Otherwise, I don't think that they're giving him the full 4 years of his initial deal. There's a lot of holes to plug on that roster, so I think they bring in Canales, again, this quarterback guru, and the thought process is that he will be able to, in a couple years, properly determine whether or not Bryce Young can have success in the NFL. And I wouldn't be super optimistic on it. To your other point, Anthony, of, maybe looking to draft someone in the 2025 draft, I'm just not sure at this point. Now, we still have a full college football season. Every year we talk ourselves into guys, so, this might be a little bit ignorant to say, coming into the college football season, but I don't know how many quarterbacks teams are really going to be wanting to move off of past players. Like, I think Carson Beck out of Georgia has a chance to be a top 10-ish pick, maybe higher, probably higher if he has a good year this season. I don't think he necessarily got enough credit over last season for what he was able to do. Shedeur Sanders is obviously one of the more polarizing guys in college football, more so because of his dad, but also those weird reports that came out about opposing coaches thinking that Sanders takes sacks purposefully. And, that's probably not even the case, but either way, we don't know what he looks like even in front of or behind an average offensive line, that I think it's going to be tough for teams to fully talk themselves into that. But again, it's very much on the table. Anthony says, I agree with you that that's a bad way to do business, and that's what I noticed with the Dolphins, that they're desperate to have a franchise quarterback, that they sign a kid to a massive contract, even though he hasn't proven anything. I don't care about the stats. It's more about the performances at the end of the season and leading up to the playoffs. I 100% agree with you there. And especially when you bring in the Dolphins example there, I think that there's a little bit of extra baggage with the way the Dolphins went about business with quarterback Tua Tagovailoa and signing him to that deal, because just a couple years ago, and obviously this became vocalized once again when Tua last week went on the Dan Le Batard show and talked about how Brian Flores really messed with his confidence level, that there was this pretty public fallout between Brian Flores and Tua, and that the organization was a little bit at a crossroads. We're either going to move on with Brian Flores, who had been a pretty good coach in Miami. I'm not saying he's worth the value that Tua gives you, but Brian Flores is a pretty good defensive mind in my eyes, between him and Tua. And especially the fact that Flores, at least from what the reports sound like, he was so in on Herbert, and he was saying that the Dolphins made a mistake that year. The Dolphins do, again, in that front office, want to prove that taking Tua wasn't a bad decision in that class over Herbert, even though I think the majority of NFL fans would acknowledge that Justin Herbert is the better quarterback and has the higher upside. That's at least my opinion. I think that's probably the popular opinion, but if you disagree, let us know in the comments section. But prove that pick was all right, and prove that, dumping Brian Flores for Tua was undoubtedly the right decision. And I think that there is upside with Mike McDaniel there, but that being said, I don't think that Tua is necessarily the quarterback who, once he's making over $50 million, once the rest of the roster takes a little bit of a step back, that he is going to be able to elevate everybody. And sort of turning this back to Bryce Young, yes, it's the way they go about business. These ownerships are prideful. Now, I don't want to be mistaken here. I do believe that Carolina just signed a new general manager this offseason. So if that is to be the case, they wouldn't have been the ones to make the deal on, in particular, whoever that general manager is, wouldn't have been the one to take Bryce Young first overall, make that trade, but the front office has to sign off on it as well, and that includes ownership. And David Tepper, we know he has a tendency to be a little bit over-involved at times, that he probably has some stake on it as well. So again, 6-year deal for Canales. I think that the plan for the Panthers is Bryce Young has 2 years to show something. One, if things go really bad this year, and that they're going to, move forward, see what Canales, this offensive-minded guy, seems to be pretty innovative, what he can do for Bryce Young if they can harness any of that talent that made Bryce Young an electric college football player. But is that ever going to translate to the NFL? Definitely a lot of question marks there. But I was glad to see him back on the field. This is somebody that, has, again, I wouldn't even say he's faced that much scrutiny. I think he gets a lot of excuses made for him. I'm pretty mixed feelings. I want him to succeed because I think that he was set up to fail a little bit by the Panthers here, and I just would prefer, an NFL league where there are a number of good quarterbacks, and that's just not reality at the end of the day. But that being said, the Panthers have a lot of places they need to upgrade on the offense and on the roster as a whole. So this isn't just a Bryce Young indictment. This is about how the team as a whole is operating and how they are going to reorient moving forwards under Dave Canales. But again, let us know whatever thoughts you have in the comments section, but we're going to be taking a quick break here, and when we come back on the other side, I want to fire off a handful of different NFL headlines from this weekend with some key injury updates. We have a suspension from Zay Jones as well, so want to dive into all of that. But first, quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we're now just going to run through a number of the big headlines and NFL news that came out over the course of the weekend. Maybe some smaller scale moves, but some notable ones for sure. We'll start off here. This morning, the Kansas City Chiefs agreed to a 1-year contract with wide receiver Juju Smith-Schuster. This is a bit of a reunion. Juju was with the Chiefs in 2022, I believe it was, when they won the Super Bowl, and Juju was a fine player during that year. Now, then following that season, where it was a little bit of a prove-it year for him, again, he was actually, the numbers were better than I thought. 933 yards, 78 receptions, 3 touchdowns, was, somewhat impactful in the playoff run. So 100%, a fine player, but we did just see Juju sign a contract with the Patriots that ended up being a horrendous deal for New England. Got to the point where Juju, on what is widely seen as one of the worst wide receiver cores in the NFL, the Patriots decided to just cut him straight up and eat the losses because of the fact that he was sort of he wasn't giving them high level production. He was very bad for them last season, and he was sort of blocking some of the younger names. So to be dropped from one of the worst teams in the NFL is obviously a tough look. That being said, it's two different worlds when you're talking about playing for the Patriots offense versus playing for the Chiefs offense. Now, that being said, even if the Patriots had a functional offense, Juju did not create a lick of separation throughout pretty much his entire season in New England. So this isn't a move that necessarily is a needle pusher by any means to me, but adding depth for a Super Bowl contending team and for a team that obviously is so high, firepower and was also very much missing wide receivers last season, that I can't say it's a bad pickup for the Chiefs getting him on this discounted price. I'm definitely not going to, again, stand on any sort of a take that Juju is this great player that was totally just in a bad situation. I think that part of it was on himself, but that being said, he should be much more productive when he is back with the Chiefs. Anthony Manzano in the comment section says, I don't blame Juju for that whole scenario and his production dipping when the quarterback was horrible in New England, and how do you expect his production to stay the same after leaving Kansas City? I hear you. Not stay the same, but I think that it was a lot of bad for Juju. I'm a Patriots fan, so trust me, I understand how bad the Patriots situation is. The offense has been borderline unwatchable. I've just been unfortunate enough to, be a Patriots fan in 2023 and watch all of these struggles, but Juju also didn't do himself any favors either. So you're right. I can't fully blame him, and I'm not. But I just don't think that Juju at this point is, that excellent of a player. That being said, he can be a wide receiver. He'll probably be a 3 or a 4 on Kansas City. They already have Rashee Rice and Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy. That adding Juju to the mix, especially with some experience, is not a bad thing whatsoever for Kansas City. But it's just not a deal that moves me all that much and changes my opinion on the Chiefs. I already think the Chiefs are really good. And adding depth there helps 100%, but I don't think it's a game-breaking move by any means. But so I knew as soon as I said it. I'm looking at a comment here from him saying, oh, come on. I'll let him finish out here, but I have a feeling I know where he's going with that. But, while he finishes that, probably skewering me for the fact that I said I'm unfortunate enough to be a Patriots fan. I know I sound spoiled. I'm sorry. These past years have been really rough, though. So, both things can be true. But also on the Chiefs is the fact that they signed center Creed Humphrey to a 4-year, $72 million contract extension. So just wanted to get in that as well. Creed Humphrey, a very good center option for them. Chiefs have had kind of an underrated, I would say, good offensive line over the course of these past few years. Creed Humphrey being a big part of that. All-Pro second team in 2022. Been a Pro Bowler each of the past 2 seasons. So I think this is a great deal for the Chiefs. Obviously, at this point, you have Patrick Mahomes. You're spending money on Patrick Mahomes and options to help just basically help Patrick Mahomes, being wide receivers and offensive linemen. So I think that this is a bit of a no-brainer deal for the Chiefs to get this done. Creed Humphrey been nothing but so solid for them since being drafted in the second round of 2021. For whatever this works, I'm trying to think who the 2021 Offensive Rookie of the Year would have been. But how about, I'll double check into that. It was Jamar Chase by a landslide. So, not really any competition. But how about Creed Humphrey being third in Offensive Rookie of the Year voting in 2021? Again, not a super impressive race there. Mac Jones was second, if you want to put it into context there. But how about Creed Humphrey, offensive lineman, getting some offensive rookie of the year votes. So that was a nice signing, I think, for the Chiefs. But additionally, we also saw a key injury take place over the weekend with DaRon Bland going down with a stress fracture in his foot. Bland led the NFL in interceptions in 2023 en route to becoming an All-Pro first-team player. That's a little bit controversial to some fans in terms of whether or not he should have been All-Pro first-team. Good player, kind of like Trayvon Diggs to some degree from 22, when it's sometimes hit or miss for Bland and Diggs. They both take a lot of risks, but at some point, if you have multiple players doing it, it's probably on the coaching as well, and it worked for them sometimes. Other times it worked, less often. Dan Quinn is gone though, and a lot of key players for this Cowboys defense are gone. Should still be a very good group overall, but DaRon Bland, again, 6 to 8 weeks is a very tough injury. And we talked about the Cowboys earlier in the show as well. I think that they're going to be very reliant on a little bit of an air raid attack on offense. They're going to need to put up points. They're going to be leaning on Dak Prescott. And I think they're going to be leaning on their defense a lot to be able to carry some of the load as well, because I have doubts with the running back room in Dallas and with the offensive line situation that they bring in a actually very established defensive coordinator in Mike Zimmer, of course, the former head coach of the Minnesota Vikings, that you get some pretty good experience there. And I think Zimmer is going to coach the Cowboys to a good season, but losing one of your top two cornerbacks headed into the year is obviously not the right foot that you want to, no pun intended, not the right foot that you want to get off in terms of heading into this upcoming season. So a very tough loss there. Anthony adds as well, Mike Zimmer was defensive coordinator at Colorado. Was he really? Because I don't think I knew that, if that was true. I didn't even know Mike Zimmer was really coaching until he got that Dallas Cowboys job. So that is very interesting. So good note there, Anthony. But again, very unfortunate break there for the Cowboys. Ultimately, Cowboys, this season's not about weeks. At that point, it'll probably be 1 through 6, 7, something like that. But it's about the playoffs. So Bland seems like, unless anything goes horribly wrong, he should be available for then, as long as the Cowboys are still in it, which is a growing take as well, that the Cowboys could end up missing the Cowboys could end up missing the playoffs altogether. I think they'll be okay, but we will have to see about that. And then last few notes here that I want to hit on is a couple of tough stories here for the Arizona Cardinals, where wide receiver Zay Jones has been suspended 5 games for violating the NFL's personal conduct policy. He's starting off his new tenure in Arizona, and it is not off to a hot start, signing this 1-year deal in the offseason. He was actually arrested during last season in November with a misdemeanor domestic battery charge. The incident took place with the mother of his child. Now, that charge was dropped in March, but the league looked into it and further determined that it was going to be 5 games. And for those curious, I know, I think it was, we had somebody in the comment section earlier talking about the idea of Rashee Rice and can the Chiefs sort of stay out of trouble off the field. I just wanted to sort of highlight the Zay Jones situation, because Rashee Rice seems like there is no imminent suspension that's going to be taking place. It sounds like to me that he's probably going to play the entirety of this upcoming season. We'll see if there are any developments there, but that's because legal issues like this take some time to develop. Zay Jones in this situation only had 1 charge to his name. Rashee Rice, I believe, has a couple to it as well. So just a little bit of perspective there on if you were wondering what all of this is with Rashee Rice and why he hasn't been suspended yet. It's because all of the legal processes have to be completed first, and then the NFL does their investigation into it. So again, a little bit of perspective there. But the other note is that the Cardinals' first-round pick, Darius Robinson, suffered a calf injury during their practice on Thursday and is expected to be out for multiple weeks, which is really tough for them. Robinson is a player that I definitely want to get to know more. I wasn't super familiar with him at Missouri, but he could have a crucial role for this Cardinals team that had the third fewest sacks in the NFL in 2023, and they are trying to sort of add to that pass rush, be able to, generate some more pressure up front. This is a very young defense, especially where Zach Gannon, he is I think one of the brightest defensive minds in the NFL that, he just wants some more pieces to play with. I thought the Cardinals overachieved at times given what they had, but definitely a tough loss for Robinson here. There's a possibility that he could be put on the IR as NFL cut day is tomorrow, where the NFL has to go down to their 53-man roster. And depending on how the Cardinals choose to go about business there, they could either put Robinson on the IR to allow another roster spot for these first few weeks, or they could just mark him as injured and just scratch him, and he would count towards one of those 53. If he goes on the IR, again, would have to be out until at least week 5, so just a little bit of transactional strategy there ahead for the Arizona Cardinals. And that is the direction I actually want to head on here, because we're 2 weeks away from the NFL season. We have been doing season previews for every division over the course of this summer, and now we're moving into our final week of NFC or of NFL previews, and we have the NFC West, and we're going to be starting off with none other than the Arizona Cardinals. So we are going to be diving into that, but first we're going to be taking a quick break. Do not go anywhere, and we will be right back after this quick break. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day as we head into our final division in the NFL for our season previews. Finally means that football is right around the corner. So we're going to be closing out with the NFC West and an Arizona Cardinals team that I am very intrigued in for this upcoming season, because everyone has sort of discarded him and has discarded quarterback Kyler Murray, but this is a Cardinals team that I could kind of see myself talking them into being competitive for a playoff spot this year. Now, question, is this a make or break season for Kyler Murray? The issue with this, because I think there were a lot of people, at least on this show, in the comments section, talking about this idea of the Cardinals shouldn't take Marvin Harrison Jr., that they should instead look to draft a quarterback instead. The problem with that is being that Kyler Murray is still on a very lucrative contract that is going to be fully guaranteed through the, I've got to double check here super quick, but he is still going to be fully guaranteed for another few seasons, and they're going to be on the books for it. So I think it becomes a very tough situation for Arizona to justify just moving on for basically nothing in Kyler Murray to be able to take a new option. He signed that deal a few years ago. It kicked in last season, and it is only going to continue to get more expensive as things go on here. So ultimately, I have a pretty hard time imagining that the Cardinals decide to move off of Kyler in these next couple seasons. Now, we'll see about that, but I think that Kyler has a little bit longer of a leash than people are really anticipating. And that being said, I also think that Kyler is... I mean, I've never been a huge Kyler defender over the course of watching him, but I also now think that people have chosen to write him off entirely, and he can be an alright option for the Cardinals, at least for these next couple years while they're trying to sort of run out the remainder of his contract. And there's a lot of question marks on this roster as well. One thing we know for sure about Kyler Murray is that when he is fully healthy, the dual threat ability from him can 100% scare opposing defenses, where he ran for 819 yards the last time that he played 16 games in a year, which for a quarterback, that's far more than you can ever even really expect to ask for unless you have a Lamar Jackson, essentially. And, Justin Fields may be in that category as well. But, Kyler has been to a couple Pro Bowls for whatever it's worth. We're talking about the Offensive Rookie of the Year in 2019, and it was a ton of money for the Cardinals to give up in the first place when they signed him to this new deal, but it's still possible, I think, to see a bounce-back season, and so does Shots Below the Belt in the comment section that he says Kyler Murray goes off in a bounce-back year for Arizona. Definitely on the table, I think. Now, can he stay fully healthy? It's definitely a question mark at this point. We talked about Bryce Young just a little bit ago on this episode, and I think that Kyler Murray, the size conversation does have some sort of a factor. Can his body take the hits of the NFL? Does he have the offensive line in front of him to protect him? I'm a little bit dubious on that. When you look at just the overall offense that they have, not a ton of known commodities on that offensive line. They did make some adjustments during this offseason, what they hope can help improve the offensive line for them. They released DJ Humphries to hope to upgrade the tackle position. Paris Johnson Jr., their first-round pick from 2023, he is now taking over the blindside protector position. They seem to have been encouraged from what he was able to produce in his rookie season, so he's on the left now. They signed Jonah Williams, another former first-round pick from the Cincinnati Bengals in 2019. They signed him to a 2-year deal, and they're putting him on the right. So seems like you should get some pretty reliable tackle play. The issue is the interior is a weakness, and it probably makes them one of the worst offensive line groups in the NFL, but maybe some upside, especially on the outside there, and that does, tend to be the big thing for them. And it's interesting, last year, you look, they were actually top 4 in rush yards per game, and that was even with James Conner dealing with some injuries along the way. So you think that maybe they could continue to build off of that with Kyler Murray. Not that I think they're going to try and be running him out all too often necessarily. I think that it at least adds an element, a wrinkle that opposing teams have to be able to take into consideration. They draft Trey Benson as well out of Florida State in the 3rd round for somebody who could also continue to produce at the next level. So that's not a bad running back room between James Conner and Trey Benson. The receivers are fine. Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to have a big impact, but he seems like somebody who the transition shouldn't be all too much of a strain for him. Basically, as soon as he stopped playing football at Ohio State, he said, I don't care about the combine or anything like that. I'm training for the NFL, because he knew that he was going to be locked into being essentially worst case scenario, a top 5 pick in the draft. And he ends up going to Arizona, number 4. And Marvin Harrison, I think, can be the best wide receiver that Kyler Murray's ever played with. Now, I know he played with DeAndre Hopkins. It wasn't in Hopkins' prime. Still had some good years. But based off of what I think Marvin Harrison Jr. can be, I think that they can have a connection like Kyler has had with nobody else since stepping foot into the Arizona Cardinals situation. Michael Wilson had a pretty promising rookie season for them as well. Trey McBride was a breakout at tight end for them. So the weapons aren't bad around Kyler. Do worry a little bit about that offensive line, but you just worry about how that's going to impact Kyler's health, because if Kyler's not playing, this quickly goes downhill. Desmond Ridder is now their backup quarterback, in case you were curious where he ended up. So, I think that's going to obviously be a very crucial part of their season. Defensively, like I just talked about in the last segment, I think that Zach Gannon is very capable of surprising people. Something that really stood out to me last season was, if you looked at the Cardinals, and we talk all the time in the NFL about offenses and this idea of pre-snap motion. You look at the Cardinals, they kind of have their own spin on that in a lot of these plays, where you have players just sort of roaming around pre-snap, not letting opposing offenses get a crystal clear look at what defense they could possibly be lined up in. Feel like I saw Zach Gannon take this to a level I never have before. I think it could honestly be, at least, bits and pieces, a little bit of the future of the NFL. It's only very limited where you can go from there, but something I'm definitely keeping an eye on there. And the key for that is going to be, adding actual players on that defensive side of the ball, which frankly, Cardinals didn't really have last year. And they spent big in this offseason to try and at least just get some more NFL-ready players for them. Some free agent signings: Mack Wilson, linebacker from the New England Patriots; Bilal Nichols, defensive tackle from the Raiders; Sean Murphy-Bunting, cornerback who played last season at Tennessee. I believe he was, I'm going to double check here, I think he was on that Super Bowl winning team with Tampa Bay in 2022, if I am not mistaken. Yeah, he was. So in that year started 13 games. So a pretty solid starter for them there as well. And then they take Marvin Harrison Jr., obviously. But by the way, massive draft class for the Cardinals this year. Took 12 selections. Probably not all of them make it, but Cardinals were just sort of firing off shots at guys, and they take Darius Robinson, who, like we just talked about in the previous segment, he is expected to miss a few weeks, but could be a big piece off of the edge for them. He was in contention for that starting spot prior to the injury, and then they followed up that selection by taking cornerback Max Melton in the second round, and he is probably going to start for them this year as well. So I think that this is a Cardinals team that, again, you look at it, 31st in scoring, second most points per game allowed. That is a brutal number. So the Cardinals have a lot of digging to do to get themselves out of this, roster hole. But I mean, they have guys that are going to be ready to play this year. And I think that it is going to lead to a big-time improvement from the Cardinals this season. And, as we sort of dive into their schedule as well, I want to highlight the comment from Shots Below the Belt as well, talking about, during Kyler's beginning years with Cliff Kingsbury on offense, he was very predictable, as he put. And I think that we saw that, again, I don't want to criticize necessarily too heavily on Cliff Kingsbury's preseason play calls because no teams are trying to give away their hand there. But I feel like to some degree, you saw maybe a little bit in the first couple of games with Washington that it's going to be at least a fresh start for this Cardinals team, for Kyler Murray, getting a fully healthy season, knock on wood, hopefully, and being able to run this back with a number of different options. Now, looking at their upcoming season, it is middle of the pack in terms of strength of schedule, and you can see why. Not too many games that are, guaranteed wins, but again, I think that they're going to be way more competitive than people anticipate, especially in those interdivisional games where the Rams, the Seahawks, and the 49ers, those have all been the teams that have been the headliners in the NFC West through these past few seasons. And the Cardinals have a chance to sneak up on them a little bit. They've been a pushover when Kyler hasn't been fully healthy, but I think that they can win way more games than anticipated. I think that the Rams and the Seahawks in particular, also both teams that can be competing for playoff spots this year, but I think that they can win these games. And ultimately, you look at some of the outer divisional opponents. I mean, they have the Commanders, they have the Patriots, they have a Chargers team that the Chargers could definitely be good this year, but still a younger team. And, we'll have to see how things sort of progress with this Justin Herbert foot injury. If it ends up extending, at that point, week 7, you think that Justin Herbert would probably be healthy. But either way, I believe the Cardinals have that game at home. So I think there's a lot of winnable games, especially when you look at who they have at home, that I think that they can capitalize. So ultimately, with the Cardinals, I have them at 8-9. Their over-under line that I saw was 6.5 wins. I think that they can exceed expectations. 8-9, you are in it to the end of the season, and I think that we could see, as Shots Below the Belt says, they got to split those division series. 1-1, you will kind of take that for some teams that, all three of them have been the Seahawks, the 49ers, and the Rams. All been to the playoffs in the past 2 seasons. So the 49ers, of course, the NFC Championship game in back-to-back years as well. So that's definitely going to be, that's the measuring stick there, actually. Going back here, you look at their games against San Francisco. Week 5 is in San Fran. That's going to obviously be a very tough one. And then they get the 49ers again, week 18 at home. That might be the one for making the playoffs or not. So definitely having those divisional matchups circled for this upcoming season with the Cardinals. But again, I have them 8-8. They're probably just out of range. I think they're going to punch above their weight class all year, though. They were kind of even a tough out last year with Josh Dobbs through the first half of the season. That being said, I think they only won 1 game with Dobbs. So you put in Kyler Murray, this is a different conversation. Again, with all the starters that are coming on defense as well, I think this is going to be a much better Cardinals team than people are anticipating, and they could be better than what I have. This can be a playoff team if Zach Gannon's the guy, if Kyler Murray is fully healthy this upcoming year. But those are a couple pretty big ifs as well. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section. I think that this is going to be a fascinating division to keep your eyes on for this upcoming season, because just the list of different outcomes that are conceivable is pretty long. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Love the active chat that we got today as well. So always appreciate hearing your guys' thoughts on the latest happenings in sports. But that is all the time we have for today. So remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Be sure to check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. And we will be back tomorrow, same time as always, at 2:00 p.m. Eastern. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn it.